Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Reinsurance Podcast. I am your co-host, Jared Lee.
And guess what? Not just Ben Reyes from the Supercede team as well, but also Jezen Thomas.
Ooh, welcome, sir.
Thanks very much.
Long-time listener, first-time podcaster.
I listen to this in my car. It's a good listen.
Yeah.
I'm learning all about the business I work in.
What we wanted to do on this one, you're in town for a number of for business reasons and things. So we thought we'd seize the moment and have you on the podcast and talk a bit about the sort of founding journey of the business. We've talked a bit about it, the two of us, sort of starting the company, but we wanted to bring the technology lens into this conversation as well. So I think we should start from the beginning.
When there was the word?
Yeah.
The very beginning. Okay.
The word was reinsurance.
The word was risk book.
Yeah, exactly.
So we basically, as many of our listeners will probably have figured out if they didn't know already, between Jared and myself, we can conjure up about one line of code. We are very much reinsurance people, not software people.
Yeah.
So when we thought we would go out and build a reinsurance technology company, wisely, in reflection, we did not seek to do it alone.
Yeah.
We interviewed, I think, more than 50 different people as a potential candidate to be our technical co-founder. And Jezen Thomas, who's with us today, rose to the top of the pile very comfortably. What do you think it was, Jezen, that made you such an attractive co-founder?
I think it was the mutual admiration for building a so-called boring business where we solve actual problems that people have in an industry. Because if you're solving real problems, then there's a real market there. Whereas if you're trying to invent stuff and follow hype, then it excites investors and stuff. But a lot of those companies that are just doing the next shiny, blockchain thing, they just tank, and it's a waste of your life focusing on these things.
When we were having our first conversations, this is years and years ago now, it was very much in the peak of like the most recent sort of hype cycle around startups, and there was a ton of new sort of social apps coming out and photo sharing apps and all of these things. And you're right that those buzzy, whizzy things can be fun, and some of them can be big businesses, but very few are solving sufficient pain points. They're like, this is just a bunch of big companies have pain points here. If we build software that helps them, they will pay us money for it.
Yeah, it was like, I want to build a company that I would want to work at. I don't want to try and enter the startup lottery and hope for the best. I want this thing to be sustainable. And I think we've built it that way so that people actually enjoy coming to work every day.
Yeah. I think that's actually one of the somewhat unique characteristics of our industry as well. And I think all of the software engineers who you've brought on board as part of our ever-growing technology team have found is that reinsurance has so many exciting niches to learn about that just when you think you've got to grips with it all, somebody tells you about another product that you didn't know existed, or another niche line of business that behaves in a slightly different way, or some unusual behavior of a tower that you didn't think was possible. And that's gold for really curious and intelligent software engineers, right? So exciting problems to solve.
Well, it touches a lot as well. Like, I think the reason amongst many, one of the big reasons why we really connected with you when we first met, again, we talked to so many potential people who were technologists who we thought could support us in building the idea that we'd had at the time, was this real lens of how do you build a company culture that attracts really, really high caliber people and keeps them there. Our turnover is incredibly low. And I know I have a number of sort of startup founder friends who are always wrestling with turnover and people leaving, and the duration of an employee's 6 months to a year at best. And we don't have any of that, but it comes from this intentionality of what does it mean to build a company that people want to stay at, that we'd want to work at, and a real investment in that. From the very earliest conversations we had was something that mattered, and the investment that we've made there has continued to prove out really, really well, in that we do have a huge amount of legacy colleagues already who are staying with us, growing their careers with us, and that's exciting.
Legacy colleagues
from the risk book days, they've got risk book hoodies.
Oh, that's a good point. I would say long tenure.
Indeed, and I think it's been really exciting to bring those colleagues to the fore. And maybe it's worth talking a bit about our development process as well. But a lot of our colleagues have had the opportunity to come and work very closely with clients on client problems, and to like listen in to our product team's calls and really understand, what exactly is Cedent X, broker Y, reinsurer Z trying to achieve. And a lot of times, I think we found in the past, a client has quite a fixed imagined view of how they think something's going to work. And then Jezen's team goes away and comes back with something and goes, so we could build it like that. Or what if you did something like this? And the client's like, I didn't know that was even possible. Yes, please. Which has always been fun.
Yeah. No, I think there's that curiosity point that you raised is spot on. And there's also this sort of very principled thinking that also goes in there, going, okay, what are they trying to solve for? And it's very easy for people to jump to solutions, and that core team, because we bring them into those client conversations so much, can deploy this sort of creative sort of lens on that and explore sort of the target end state the user's trying to get to, and sort of think outside the box in a way. It's like, okay, what are those variety of ways by which we can do that? And then from there, work towards what the best way to achieve that is.
I mean, for me, I think that comes from, I got my start of my career in Sweden. I used to work in Gothenburg, and Swedish working culture is very not hierarchical. It's very flat, which I think suits software engineering very, very well. You don't have so many titles and middle managers and bosses and stuff. You have maybe one person who runs a company, and then a bunch of people who just sit and solve problems at a reasonable pace and not be interrupted. They get their focus time. They can do really meaningful work. And I think our team has been built in that fashion, and it's led us to a place where people aren't siloed so much. So we don't have people saying, well, this is my area of responsibility, and I don't touch that other stuff. Actually, we get people, like, it's a really collaborative environment, because we get people mucking in with stuff that they would normally not touch in a larger company. So actually, I think it's very impressive, Ben. You've been, exploring another organization's API by interacting with it with Postman and building up the JSON requests, the body of the request and stuff.
We're learning gradually. 2 lines of code between Jared.
Ben owns both.
But this is the important work. This is the getting your hands dirty and not being afraid to really dig in. Because if a company has this mentality of, well, that's not my department, someone else can worry about that, it just leads to I don't know, a culture of lots of meetings and not much productivity, whereas we actually just do stuff.
Yeah. Well, I think there's this culture of autonomy and focus on what's important. And we spend a lot of time with our team as a whole, but the engineering team specifically, around what matters to us most as a business, and then letting them identify, as they go through their daily work, areas that need additional attention. Like, we talk a huge amount of the importance of security as a platform. So anytime engineers are doing things and there's a way to improve further what we do, there's always this time it's like, oh, I'm going to set this aside. I'm going to finish this. I'm going to add this layer here, because that will reinforce what we're doing from a security perspective. Like, that's important work, and they shouldn't wait until someone else in the organization highlights a need to improve something. If they're in the weeds and they see areas we can continue to improve, do that now. And that's really, really valuable for us as a business.
I think it comes as well with having, because I don't know if everyone knows this in the podcast, but having an in-house team as well. So when we first started, Jared and I were the only business people for a really long time, and it was entirely it was an engineering company.
7 hires were all engineers. Yeah.
But it means you can have these. It's not like complete the work you've been contracted to do. It's like, no, this is their company. This is the engineers' company, and they really care about what they're building. I remember a few years ago, one of our colleagues in the Netherlands came and said, I found a way to do what is technically called military grade encryption across the entire platform. Can I do it? And I was like, yes, you can.
You have the green light too.
Yeah. I don't think you get that in any organization where you have, even an IT department that's not the core business. They're kind of the people you send requests to, or similar. Or if you're outsourcing it, even worse, right? They work to rule based on what's in the contract. It's really, really exciting to be part of a company where we live and breathe what we build.
Yeah, we always play the analogy battle game. I don't know if we have one today, but you'd given one to us early in the journey, Jezen, that was this idea that so many companies treat engineering as sort of like, here's your ticket for the day, and you walk into the office and you pick up the thing you're going to do and you work on that and you hand your completed task done and you move on to the next ticket you're given. And not only does that sort of demoralize that engineering team quite a lot, but it takes away, as you were saying, Ben, that sort of focus on, this is my company too, and I want to make sure we're building the best product we can at every point. And instead of just me going, well, I'm doing my task, but we obviously have things that we're working on, we have objectives we're trying to achieve, and we have ways that people pick up work to do. But it's not only, this is the thing I've been told to do, I will only do that and move on. It's this, what are things that I'm bumping into as I do this work that I should sort of write some stuff up and go away and do that next, because that's important for us, because it's that sense of ownership the whole company gets.
I think that ownership part means also that people are less inclined to tinker with frivolous things. So it's a real boon for productivity, because people are working on stuff that's actually meaningful to the business and will make them feel a sense of progression, rather than just, I've done my Jira cards and now I want to tinker with this other shiny technology. We don't have so much of that at Supercede, which is really cool.
I think the research days is a really interesting concept here. If you want to share a bit about those, because that's probably not common to many organizations. But
I think it's not common. It's something, again, I stole from my background in Sweden from a company there, but it's actually only one company there that I worked for that did this. But basically the idea is that initially every second Wednesday, we don't do chores on the product. We're not polishing the widgets and stuff. It's actually, research, read about, play with, tinker with some kind of technology that interests you that could arguably be rolled into something that we do. So perhaps that's, some kind of type theory stuff, or perhaps that's another approach to automated testing. We actually have lots of different kinds of automated testing. We have this philosophy of defense in depth at Supercede in our technology, to make it really, robust and do it the justice that it deserves, because we are serving really big clients and the data is really, really important. And typically at companies, engineers have to research stuff and learn new stuff on their evenings and weekends, which is kind of ridiculous. I mean, the whole point of the engineers' work is to learn things and apply their learnings and invent things on the spot. So I think it's kind of silly for companies to not explicitly invest in this learning time. And not only did that, is that great for engineers, and they feel a real sense of progression in their career because they're really focusing on learning, but also it's paid off, even in a business sense for us, like, in a really selfish way. Like, we've rolled very valuable features into the product that are a result of these research days. And in fact, it's been such a successful thing that the other Wednesdays we've now turned into essentially other research days also, but the theme is different. It's not rigorously enforced, but it's typically one Wednesday will be research day, and then the alternate Wednesday is now open source day, because a lot of the technology that underpins the system that we write uses, it's all open source, and somebody needs to maintain that. It's kind of unethical and irresponsible for companies to just use stuff that people build for free and then capitalize on it. Like, it's a bit of a tragedy of the commons thing. We want the stuff to improve and stay, nicely maintained. So we have to do that work. And that's so the stuff that we use gets better. It stays maintained and gets better. And it also, it's really great for an engineer's career, because typically when if you move on to another company, your next employer wants to see what you've worked on, but usually everything that you've worked on at an employer is proprietary. So you can say, I did all this amazing stuff, but I can't show you. Sorry.
Mhm.
So with this system, at least we're setting up our engineers for future success, even without us.
Mhm.
It hasn't come to that. We have excellent sort of tenure. People want to stick around at Supercede. But we're still supporting people, even if that weren't the case.
Yeah. I also think it works from a recruitment standpoint. I think in that open source community, which again, lots of engineers leverage for all manner of projects, they see a lot of work from colleagues of ours, and they get interested in what they're working on and what they're doing and how they're solving problems and how they communicate and everything around that. And that opens up quite a significant pipeline of talent. Like again, one of the things that surprise and shocks other founders is we have like a backlog of engineering talent sort of inquiring about joining the business. And most founders really struggle with getting engineering hires. And we've been fortunate. I think it's because of some of this work that we're doing in the open that allows those people in our space to be interested in that and seeing what we're doing and being impressed by that and going, there's some really, really smart people there. Let me see if I could be a part of that.
And employer branding is like a thing that companies invest in.
Mm-hmm.
But it seems it's surprisingly uncommon for companies to just say, yeah, go and work on open source stuff.
Yeah.
Could there be a better way for engineering companies to do employee branding? I don't think so. It's really
not
good
always beanbags.
I mean, just while we've got you on the show, Jezen, because you'll actually do justice to this definition, could you help maybe our less technical listeners understand what on earth we're talking about when we say open source? Because I realize if you're a reinsurance broker or underwriter, you probably don't spend much time on GitHub or in open source communities. What kind of things, how specific are we talking about? Is it the entirety of Supercede is available on open source, or is it tiny things that make up a bigger app? How does it work?
In our case, it's all of the infrastructural components that don't have any specific meaning to our own business logic. So the same infrastructure can underpin Supercede, but it can also underpin someone's blog about their cats or someone's sandwich shop or Facebook or whatever. That's one sort of general abstraction layer that needs to be robust for everybody. And then you build your own proprietary stuff on top of that. Mm-hmm. So the stuff that's our core business logic, that is proprietary. Mm-hmm. That's private. People can't just go and look at it unless they work for us. And we charge companies to use our system. But the rest of it, it's worked on by people all over the world. Sometimes they're paid, sometimes not. And it's really beneficial to have lots of sets of eyes on something, especially something like cryptography, for example. Now, we don't roll our own cryptography because that's a very deep area of study, and it would be very foolish for us to try and invent something. We don't have the guy from A Beautiful Mind working for us.
John Nash, is that right?
I was thinking Russell Crowe. But things to do with security, for example, you don't want to have a case where your security situation is essentially just security by obscurity, as in, there are lots of vulnerabilities, but what's covering us is that no one knows about it yet. Actually, what you want is that your security is so sound that everyone can look at it and they can see, actually, there's no way for an attacker to get in here.
I think we found this with our penetration testers, didn't we, in the past, where we quite regularly bring in a range of penetration testing teams. We do our monthly scans with Mozilla and so on, and it is really, really fascinating, for me at least, as somebody who's taken a growing interest in this space, to actually read all of the reports and see all of the attack vectors that get explored, and to just see how we've built quite transparently walls that you can't climb over.
Sometimes that kind of thing is really mundane, but sometimes it is as sexy as you see in the films.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Actually, one of the first penetration tests that we arranged, I went to their offices, and they used to work, Secret Service for a government, perhaps which country I shouldn't say. But that was very cool, and I spoke to a number of former service agents, and they brought me inside their Faraday cage. where deals are done that can't be eavesdropped upon.
Yeah.
That was a very fun experience.
We'll have to get our own Faraday cage at some point in the Supercede offices for penetration testing.
On someone's boat, a boat with a Faraday cage.
If we then sort of, when you look at, as again, you joined me and Ben on this sort of journey a number of years ago now, and we sort of set out with what the industry was trying to do, where we thought the industry was going, and how we thought we could get there. And as you've become more of an expert in reinsurance, we've always had our thoughts as to why has this technology not worked before? Why have solutions not been sort of, have they not emerged previously? I wondered if you had any thoughts as to things that we're doing that is allowing us to sort of land and work in an area that has historically not gotten some of these larger solutions to sort of take off.
Yeah, the answer to that is both simple and complex, in that I can give you a very pithy answer in that, well, we iterate very frequently, and we, as much as we can, use first principles thinking. Mm-hmm. But actually executing on those things is really tough, and that's something that we focus on like really a lot, and we're always reviewing how we go about doing that. So I think we have a very regular release cycle. It's like we deploy as many times as we can per day, and make the changes very, very incremental, which also it manages the risk of change with the system over time. It makes rollouts smoother. It's really good, but then also it's enabled us to be more sort of agile in reacting to actual needs of the users on the ground, not just some visionary who managed to snag some business deal and say, well, this is going to be the future. This is how everything's going to work. Yeah, and they try and do this grand design in their head up front, which never plays out in reality. Yeah, instead, we talk to actual people using the system, and they say, this is great. I love this, but it doesn't handle this edge case. Okay, that's interesting. So let's make this minor tweak to really solve their problems actually, and we just keep going little by little, solving real problems every time. Yeah, which is a really hard thing to do, and this isn't the kind of thing that you can outsource to somebody else. You need smart people to think about this every day.
And I'd seen that very much firsthand, working with larger, again, we won't go into names, but like industry collaboration efforts, where they set out like, here's the next sort of 6 or 9 months of our roadmap. So now when someone's like, it doesn't handle this fringe case, I've literally had meetings where the answer is, great, so we should certainly address that. It sounds really important to our clients. So in autumn of 2023, we will get to that thing, because the roadmap is like locked, and because they're taking such big chunks of work at any given time that it makes them almost impossible to be responsive. And when you're trying to solve, as we've talked about, actual problems for actual users and actual clients, the things that they'll bump into using the product on a daily, weekly basis for their most important work, they always bump into unique little nuances, or we do this one thing this one way. Those are actually oftentimes quite easy things to fix and solve for if you've designed yourself and your business to accommodate those changes. If you design it to be flexible enough to go, that's a really good point. Let's actually start doing that in a couple days' time versus a few months' time. And that sort of iteration cycle means that they're getting a product that's absolutely fit for purpose all the time, and that responds very quickly to edge cases that may not have been covered when they first started using it.
It's like we had the recent case with cedents struggling and brokers struggling with submission data that was sourced from a range of different databases coming out in all sorts of different formats, and they were just trying to get it into a consistent shape, trying to be able to put it directly into Supercede whatever shape it was in. And we explored a bit some of these huge multi-million kind of, or maybe more, companies that are out there that sell standard solutions that could have been something we use, could have been something that our customers tried to use, but the fringe cases as you say, like the fact that we're calculating to more decimal places than you,
Mm.
and that's really important for this transaction, or other things that required a degree of specificity that wasn't possible with the mainstream solutions.
Yep.
We were able to take in-house and say, it's okay, our case study is actually quite limited in terms of what we need to be able to do.
Mm.
But in quite a short order, we were able to get to the point where any cedant or broker could basically chuck in a file in any format and have it automatically structured and validated by Supercede,
Yep.
which all of these other companies gave the exact same response to our customers that you just said. They said, oh, that's not something that we can do, but when we do our review of our roadmap in a year and a half's time, we'll think about whether it'll go on the year and a half's time after that.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I'm telling your story, but how do you create a starting point, Jezen, where you're able to take on these creative challenges? Like I presume, I mean, I'm acting dumb here. On behalf of our listeners, I presume, or we all presume, that you need to have a pretty solid foundation to work around to be able to then be so adaptive and creative in response to random client problems that they discover in the various intricacies of reinsurance.
To borrow from Marty Kagan's words, don't have a roadmap, which is kind of an extreme thing to say, but essentially you don't want to make big plans like that because you can't see the future, and you can't see all those edge cases that you're going to run into, and all those edge cases, that's all irreducible complexity. That's the whole reason why Supercede is compelling, because we're capturing the complex parts of your business that other companies can't really do, because those hard bits are not very sexy to think about, so they're kind of dismissed a bit. So how do we do it? We prototype and we iterate over and over again, and think about things that way.
I also think it plays massively into our hands with this strategy, this idea that you're always solving the most important and painful things for clients, right? When you take a huge piece of work and you sort of scope it out to all the bells and whistles and all the nuance and detail of it, you're going to spend a lot of time building things that actually no one cares about. You build this feature that does this, and you realize 6 months later that not a single user has ever opened that thing. But if you start with the core piece that's solving a bunch of their pain points, and you talk to users a lot the way we do, they'll tell you what else they want next. And when a bunch of those users are saying the same thing, we do that thing next, and we continue to do that over and over and over. And we have a huge list of things that are coming that we're working on, but it comes from all of those things we know are important for clients, versus building a bunch of things in a cave and really hoping that when we come out of the cave, they'd be like, this thing is awesome in every way. Because even if they love it, there's going to be areas that they don't use. And those areas still took a lot of time to build. And if you just sort of iterate and iterate and iterate, you're always iterating into their pain points and solving their real problems. And I think that serves us very, very well.
But again, that comes from first principles thinking.
Yeah.
Of like, they've told us, can you add this thing? Can you add that thing? But then you have to think, okay, what are they actually trying to achieve here? Mm-hmm. What problem are we actually solving? We could add all manner of bells and whistles, but what's the inherent idea that we're doing here?
Yeah, I can remember how our stacking policy detector was first born. It was, somebody was trying over and over again to deal with the fact that there were missing or unknown kind of stacks that they hadn't yet discovered, and they were having to manually scroll, despite having stacking IDs in place, and they wanted to do a final check. But then as it got shared to more and more users at more and more companies, we found some people were trying to then use the stacks detector that we have as the first point of call, so not doing any of it manually and using it as a after the fact check, but actually using it as their first way of detecting stacks. And we were like, well, it's not built to do that, but would you like it to be? And they're like, yeah, can you make it? And very quickly you start exploring, okay, what are all the different algorithms that you use currently? Can we get a computer to do it instead? And so on. It was very powerful, I think, once we
Well,
engage the real user and see them trying to do something
yeah,
and hit a wall and be like, we noticed you hit a wall.
yeah,
Can we help you get through that wall?
And that's actually like a really tough spot in the design space, because as far as I'm aware, that as a product doesn't exist
No.
anywhere else.
Yeah.
And the workflow is complex enough, especially with the data involved, that you can't just throw a very typical product design approach at it. Like, you really have to iterate on this thing. And our first approach to it, we scrapped. Like, we ran it. It was kind of solving the problem, but it wasn't really fit for purpose.
Yeah.
And we learned more about the design space as we worked on it. It's like, okay, it kind of works, but actually it needs to work better. So we're going to do it again, and it's going to be much better this time. And we're going to learn more. And I think not being afraid of iterating and redesigning stuff to get to the core of what we're trying to build.
Yeah. Well, I think it goes into sort of the natural evolution of how people interact with products. And the value of this iteration model is that you build something out, and if you say that feature is now done, I'm going to move on to the next features that we've had like teed up. The users are experiencing something that's they've never had before. And what you almost always bump into is them then going, well, now that I have this, I want to do this other thing. This other thing was never even in their realm of consciousness because they'd never had the opportunity to think about that before. So if you make it where that next thing that they really want now, that you've sort of opened this view up to them, is off the table for a year and a half, they're just going to get a bit like, oh, but that's what I want to do.
Yeah.
And so if you make it where, as you introduce these new features, you're going to get behavioral changes from users that will want them to do, they'll want to do other things. And that's a very, very effective way. And now when we go into, new clients and things, we say, well, you can just chuck your bordereaux in here and we'll help you find all your stacks. This is a thing that, as you said, doesn't exist, and they've never even conceived of having automated.
Yeah.
And they love this as a thing. But the early idea when we talked about the clients that expressed a pain point there, it wasn't that I want you to do all of it for me, because that was beyond feasible at the time. But we've made that a reality through this sort of iterative approach, which I think is working fabulous.
Yeah, I remember a great example of that was when we started doing reporting after a while, and you had, wait a minute, so you can get more than one subsection together and look at, a limit profile or an attachment profile for the whole section across all the subsections. We're like, yeah, and they're like, could you do it across 2 different submission packs for 2 different lines of business? And we're like, well, yeah. I mean, and it's now at the point where it's like, okay. And then they're going to their boss or whatever and saying, so CEO, so, the CEO, we're getting to the point where all of our outwards data is structured and formatted in the same way and validated and generated into all sorts of exhibits and so on with filters that are being requested every other week with, checks for all different things. It's like, what do you want to know? And it's like going into a sweet shop for them that they didn't know existed, because it's suddenly, well, can I see, my largest losses or changes in losses in the loss run across my entire company? Can I see, what's changed in terms of our average attachment points across the entire company this year? It starts to get really powerful when people are now rolling Supercede enterprise wide.
Yeah.
And as you say, that's where you move from solving that individual group of the first user's problem to their team's problem to now their company's problem. I think that's where we start to see some really exciting things happen.
We might have to start telling people that we work at Gringotts. Is that reference correct? I don't remember Harry Potter, but is that the sweet shop in Harry Potter?
No, that's the bank.
You've done the bank, but I thought that also kind of worked. Because,
what was the sweet shop called?
Was it Fred and George's sweet shop?
Yeah, but what did they name it?
I don't know. Oh, this is the quiz question.
Shout louder.
You're our resident Harry Potter, aren't you?
I have a visual likeness, but not much more to offer, sadly.
And we ponder deeply for the next 6 minutes. Cordy will introduce music. Go.
While Rowling calls her lawyers.
There it is. It's a bit of a tongue twister. Weasley's Wizard Wheezes.
Oh, I think that's
actually their joke shop. So I think I was wrong.
I think they had
it's something else.
Jokes and candy.
Yeah, because they had something else, and then they had lots of brands for all the different sweets and chocolates, right? So
Yeah.
there were, God, this is like the recesses of my childhood brain.
Yeah.
Bertie Bott's every flavored beans,
Yeah.
That rings a bell.
chocolate frogs.
Yeah.
Aren't those real?
I'm pretty sure you can buy
real
frog
frogs.
made.
um,
But I don't know if they all came from the same sweet shop or not.
I just like the lady on the train with the cart, the sweet
Yeah.
cart that's got the. Oh, this is a strong tangent.
It is.
This is a tangent worthy of the Reinsurance podcast right here.
I'll
Yeah,
take the lot.
My apologies.
Yeah. So if you want a wizard-worthy technology trove, then look no further than Supercede. I think was the conclusion of that very long analogy. But yeah. So one of the other things I wanted to talk about while we have Jezen here is our hackathons, because we've had a lot of fun with hackathons over the years, and I think it's partly because we have quite competitive team members as well once they really get going. But what we do sort of every 3 months or so now, isn't it? We get the team, and for a few days up to a week, set them a separate challenge, or they choose from a menu of challenges. It's changed quite a few times how we've done it, but literally divide the team in half, and they compete to win a hackathon as a team. And it's the greatest honor I think that you can gain at Supercede is to emerge victorious in the hackathon. But
well, the wild thing about that is that business people really have no intuition for how quickly a good engineer can whip something up that's compelling. It took no time at all for one of our engineers to put together this system that can change the way that sort of cells in a spreadsheet are interpreted or parsed by our system. So when someone's ingesting data, there's some submission pack data. You have a bunch of numbers in a column, but it's ambiguous as to whether that's a monetary amount or if that's a time period or data or something. The validation that we apply to it, or the passes that we apply to it, we can say, well, this column doesn't make sense in a few of these cases that we've highlighted. Would you like to try parsing it a different way? And here's how it would look if we applied a different parser. So this is like a whole new world of data cleansing and validation that I think doesn't really exist for most businesses. And this was, a sort of prototype for this was put together in I think a couple of days.
What I loved as well is this. So this was collectively like, how do we even further enhance at the end of last year, I think it was, how do we further enhance getting data into Supercede? And you had that parsing tool all on the same team as well at this point, like collectively entering their combined solution. And somebody else on that team as well did a machine learning algorithm that would help auto match columns, and based on the way that the columns had been originally named in the spreadsheet you submitted, would suggest alternative column headers that matched the data you needed to have in there. So it'd be like, we've noticed that you've used premium or gross written premium for the top of this column. In all of your other packs, it's called
GWP or
GWP. Yeah, exactly. And which a normal kind of a fuzzy lookup tool wouldn't necessarily draw that relevance between. But he had already adapted it to account for the fact that we had many different ways of jumping between terms that were not, you've probably got lots of technical ways of explaining this, but string similarity in some way. It was going beyond string similarity and just basing it on user history data.
Well, I think it's called Hamming distance, but I think I might be mixing that up with a different kind of string similarity. The best way to get to the bottom of this is by saying something that's wrong, and then someone's going to write in and tell us that it's wrong. So it's called Hamming distance, by the way. Tell me I'm wrong.
But I think stuff like that's especially when you think about global clients of ours who have users across a number of different offices. Like the fact that when one user in one office adjusts a mapping and says, oh, that's the column I meant. It means that every other future user at that client now has that mapping, like it'll get it right next time. And then someone else has named it slightly differently, and that will be just added into the thing, and it will get smarter and smarter and smarter. So that 30 or 40th user that is onboarded, like now it's magic.
Yeah. I quite
because
literally, it's like,
because they chuck in a file and we know where everything goes. Partly because our system is learning from them as well, but their own colleagues across the business that they might not even know are feeding the additional things that are helping it be easier and easier for them to do it. And it's those sort of little things, that attention to that detail, that compounds in a really powerful and a valuable way for clients.
And what's wild about that is that, the industry makes a big song and dance about data standards or standard formats for data. But that's almost always done by some committee in one part of the world, and they want to impose their design decisions across the rest of the world. Whereas if you have a machine learning approach like this, then the system, the standards are evolving based on the reality of how the data is used across the world and across cultures and across teams.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think when you look at how we send data out of our system, again, we're very API centric, and data can come in or go out of our system in any way, in any form. But you have it where some people downstream might want something else too. They want the core things in this sort of standard that the industry's agreed on, but they also saw you had that. Can I get that too? You're like, of course you can. Oh, can I get that? You're like, of course you can. And it's that approach to going, and maybe in time the standard will include those two additional points, but we can just give them to you now as well. We'll give you the stuff that is in that sort of standard list that you want, but we know that there's much more you might want, or maybe even less that you don't want. And it should evolve like that. It should evolve to being like whatever you're asking for is available, rather than I can only get the list that's in the standard, right? And those are things that are going to drive a lot more value in time, because people can think about other things that they might want to explore, tools they might want to build, etc.
It's interesting, isn't it? I'm imagining some huge kind of evolving dictionary times thesaurus way of envisioning standards in the future, where it's actually a language and not a strict vocabulary.
We're going to make like Reinsurance Urban Dictionary.
I love it.
It would be fun if you go into the help center. It's just the Urban Dictionary of reinsurance terms.
It's probably feasible, actually. We could explore this with a very safe for work attitude and make sure that it's got useful terms.
We can crowdsource it with the under 35s, get Kimber back in here, and we can...
Well, because there's lots of things there's lots of terms that are confusing and not very official, and presumably many more that we don't know that are in lines that we haven't worked in, or geographies that we haven't worked in.
The funniest thing, and I think the reason standards are pushed so hard in our industry, is the same thing will mean a lot of different things depending on who you're talking to. And one of the challenges when you've seen really big collaboration efforts historically is those really big firms actually wrestle with disagreeing on what's included in like a net written premium number, and so there's this real disconnect of like what is actually included in this, and all these companies look at it from a slightly different lens.
Tune into our accounting episode.
Yeah, exactly, coming soon. But it's recognizing that, and again, if you move towards a more flexible standard in a lot of ways, you can just sort of say, okay, well, what are the things you want? Well, you want this minus those things, but including that thing. It's like, okay, we'll give you that number then. I don't care what you want to call it. Like, we'll give you that thing that you're looking for. Again, first principles thinking in a lot of ways.
I mean, it's standards, again, is one of those really unsexy areas that is deceptively simple. It seems almost inconsequential, but it's such a hard thing to get right, and that's why I lean towards this classic XKCD comic, where the standard scenario is somebody walks along and says, "What? There are 14 standards for this thing? Like I have to make the standard to end all standards." And then now there are 15 standards. Well done.
But we recognize, you look at the big bodies, Accord, who's done a huge amount of work in introducing a standard for many of the big companies around the world. There's always companies who aren't part of that sort of consortium, aren't part of that group, who have a slightly different view. And we need to, whilst we work very closely with Accord, we also need to support people who aren't using that approach and going, okay, well, we can't be sort of myopic in just supporting the one thing. It's like, well, how do we support all of our clients regardless of what view that they have? And it makes our lives a lot easier if everyone supports standard number 2, but if a couple people are doing another one, we need to be able to support them too.
Yeah, I mean the world just isn't, round corners like that.
Yeah.
There are difficult bits.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask you a question, Jezen, because presumably it must have been a strange experience coming to the industry for the first time many years ago. And, I know you said you were looking for a big, boring industry with real work that needed doing. What were your first impressions when we started to tell you about reinsurance as an industry and also the way things were done today?
I think what's surprising is how low the sort of standard is, or the barrier to doing something meaningful. I mean, unfortunately, the sort of technology environment is pretty terrible in reinsurance. So you don't have to do something really amazing to actually change people's lives. I mean, we want to do really amazing things, and I think we have done, but just doing something that works in a sensible way would, sensible way meaning how quite a lot of other sort of productivity tools or things for consumers work. Other industries have figured it out. Why is reinsurance so slow moving? The reasons for that are I'm sure varied and complex, but there's so much impact that we can have, which we are having because people are using our systems and their lives are now better for it. But there's still a lot of impact we can make. Yeah, and it's kind of shocking that there aren't that many players in this space actually doing meaningful work.
Yeah, there's an example that jumps to mind when you said that about storing files on our platform. Like we have no size constraints and no file type constraints and all of these things. And our engineering team is like, well, that's pretty basic to implement. It's as long as their internet is stable enough to upload a file of this size, like we can put it on the internet. We can host it and securely for them.
And do virus scanning on the way in.
And virus scan it on the way in and store it, encrypt it, and all these things.
I mean, I'm sure all of our users have Netflix subscriptions. And I think that level of technical complexity, because it's so nicely abstracted away, it's just taken for granted. Like, they can stream 4K video directly into their living room. Sure, that's table stakes, but actually that's pretty technically complex, and servicing that kind of scale, millions of people around the world at speed of light, it's pretty incredible. We don't have the same challenges in reinsurance. I mean, the data that we have to service is not insignificant, but it's not Netflix scale exactly. So actually we have like so much room to just make stuff work nice.
Yeah. When you look at existing solutions and they're sort of you can upload a file under 3 gigs or something like this, which has a huge amount of constraint for users who are in our space. But it's all these things where all the solutions that they've had to date have all these sort of weird structural constraints that then they have to find other workarounds for, and they have to partner with an FTP site or similar. Like, how about we just let you do anything here and chuck whatever you want in and let your partners download it, and like those sorts of things. And as we lean into scale and as we use more and more data for each of our clients, like how do we deploy that, deliver that to them in real time, like instantly, do this work? And it's easily doable when you're building a technology company aimed at solving these things.
And I guess to some extent that's a contemporary comment as well. It'd be interesting to get your thoughts, Jezen, on having spent more than a decade in tech and software development. If you imagine starting a company like Supercede 10, 15, 20 years ago, which is when many of the kind of existing vendor solutions were formed, or even earlier than that in a lot of cases. It's quite a few firms in the market from the 1980s or earlier. What are the different starting points that you have to work with? How do these firms stand up, I guess, to being able to start everything in the late teens of the second millennium?
The landscape is so different now. I think the technological landscape has really been democratized over time Because if we were starting this 20 years ago, then we'd be invariably doing some kind of Microsoft thing.
Yeah.
And it's like, here's your Microsoft machine and your Microsoft servers and your Microsoft suite of tools. And not much to speak about in terms of distributed version control. So good luck managing changes over time. I mean, I think they had it, but I don't remember when Subversion came out. But it was a different approach to managing change. And what we have now is just better. Fundamentally for a number of reasons, and also the sort of robustness landscape is wildly different now. We can lean on things like type theory, which we use a bit in our system, which obviates the need for quite a lot of automated tests that we otherwise would have had to write. And writing all these automated tests takes time, which is money. And if you have to have humans doing this manually, then that increases the surface area for things to go wrong, because you can't rely on just human discipline. I mean, for some things you have to, but you want to try and minimize that. So we would have so much more inertia if we were starting 20 years ago, because we don't have the same, we can't take the same liberties with the technology. I think the distribution of so the body of work, the prior art, there was less of it, of course. Now we get to lean on all the technological advancements and theoretical advancements that all the smartest people in the world, employed by lots of big companies, they've made these changes to society, and we get to now stand on the shoulders of giants. So we benefit, which is great for us. I mean, actually, some of the best programmers go and work at Facebook, and they're solving hard problems. Okay, like Facebook as a brand, that's kind of besides the point. And whether or not you like social media is besides the point. But dealing with change to a system in a reliable way, that's a hard problem to solve. And they've invested lots in solving that. And we get to enjoy the fruits of that labor. Managing and identifying spam, that kind of stuff, we benefit from that. And it's not exclusively Facebook. It's all manner of big companies. So I think, we definitely wouldn't be sitting here and feeling quite so smug if this were 20 years ago.
No, for sure. And I think that democratization piece is spot on as well from a cost perspective. When you can sort of grow with AWS or Azure, whatever your cloud provider of choice is, it doesn't require that sort of upfront, here's my servers that I'm licensing every month and this huge cost. It goes, we're still really small, so our bill is really small. And we're a little bit bigger, so the bill's a little bit bigger. And as you grow, like Netflix, as you said, is going to have a huge AWS bill. But they've grown into that bill. And it allows you to sort of bill and be charged for and pay for things aligned with your usage and your own growth, where again 20 years ago you didn't have that as an option. It was here's our server that's being only a fraction utilized, or now we're overusing that one, so we need to sort of scramble for additional servers and pay up front for that. Like that whole model has gone away now.
It's kind of how AWS was born, I guess.
Yeah.
Effectively.
No, exactly.
I mean, even when I started my career, we're still doing, we had a server cupboard.
Yeah.
And occasionally I'd have to go in there and then be intimidated and hope they don't lock me in.
Yeah. Wow.
That feels like a cold note to end on. The image of Jezen locked in the server cupboard.
Back to our Faraday cage all over again.
So we are running out of time and do need to wrap up. I guess any final thoughts that you want to share with all the reinsurance people out there as they look optimistically at the brighter future for
to not be afraid of technology.
Call me. That's it. I mean, talk, not me specifically, but talk to us.
That sounds perfect. All right. Well, thank you, sir. Always a pleasure and good to have you on the podcast.
Thanks for having me.
Cheers, everyone.